Welcome, everybody. We know that this discussion will be about the Buying Legal Counsel's 2020 Market Intelligence Report. It's an excellent report, an enormous amount of insights, and we won't be able to touch on all of them, but hopefully we'll be able to touch on some of the key ones and get the panel to talk about some of their own experiences and their feedback on those insights. To set the scene a little bit, I think it's actually quite important to recognise that the survey that put together essentially the insights in the Market Intelligence Report took place in January and February of this year. So very much a kind of a pre-COVID background, if you like. So what I think will be interesting during our discussion here is if we assess some of the findings and discuss those findings in the light of the time period up to January, February, and we can talk about what we think has changed and whether perhaps COVID has acted as a bit of an accelerant on some of those findings. So I think that's going to be interesting. I might kick off with my favourite part of the report is really the very opening, where the report comes out what I call swinging, and it opens up by saying something like there's more than $900 billion of legal spend. So that's going to get to $1 trillion pretty soon globally. And the report talks about it bordering on negligence for companies today not to organise a formal procurement effort in order to manage that legal spend. So coming out swinging. So what I'd like to put to the panel to start off with, what you think that formal legal or procurement process or effort might be. Does that mean that just procurement takes care of things, or is something different? And then perhaps some feedback on what do we think? Do we think some kind of a formal procurement effort is necessary in this day and age? Is it negligent, or is it less than best practice not to have some kind of a formal effort?
So I think that a procurement process is vital. Certainly, from my perspective, to have the structure to go out to firms and alternative legal service providers, creating a level playing field and creating some parameters in which you can compare like for like is really, really important. And it's also an opportunity to give the legal service providers the opportunity to demonstrate how they respond to those questions. In answer to your question about procurement, the procurement function, the sourcing function is absolutely essential. I see the procurement process as being a partnership between the legal team and the sourcing colleagues. Sourcing or procurement have got the expertise in terms of going through that procurement process. And I think the legal team can assist in terms of setting the legal strategy, being very clear about the legal content, but they are very different roles. Together, I think it's a great combination.
So in your view, John, certainly falling short of best practice if you don't have some kind of a procurement effort or a framework around engaging outside counsel or the buying of legal services.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Absolutely.
Andie, what about you?
I completely agree with John, and I'm probably biased as well because I'm in procurement. So I will absolutely say that it's best practice ever to do it. Yeah. But I mean, when a lot of people also have the misconception, and I want to clarify that for some of the people who might not know procurement that well. When you talk about procurement, a lot of people will jump to the perception that they're the bad guys, they will negotiate hard, they will try to squeeze water out of a piece of rock or something, and that's procurement. That's part of our job sometimes, but there's a bigger thing behind that too. Is to John's point, we take care of the process, right? We make sure that the RP is done in the right manner, make sure that we are comparing apples and apples, and also stimulate thoughts with the legal counsel too. Think through the scope, what exactly are our requirements, so that the law firms would actually know what we are asking. Because without that process, people could be answering to the same RP with a very different answer, and we are not even comparing apples to apples. So that's one part of it. And of course, there's the analytics part that, lawyers might not even have time to do that at all. Some folks have the luxury of maybe finance folks helping them, but that's probably not their full-time job either. And procurement can help with that regard, generating insights out of those big data that we have. We're sitting on mounds of data that we probably don't even utilize 50% of, if not lower.
Well, I'm glad you've raised some of those points, Andy, because I think we're going to do a bit more of a deeper dive in some of those specific strategies. Let me guess, Sandy, I'm guessing that you're also of the view that procurement does play an important and significant role, and it's going to be something short of best practice not to have a procurement strategy in the buying of significant legal services. Am I right on that?
You are absolutely right, Jim. Not surprisingly. Since that effectively is my paycheck, that's what I'm here, that's what I do, that's what I believe and I'm passionate in, then I think it is absolutely right that if you're looking to deliver best practice, developing an appropriate procurement support function that's right for your organisation and links in correctly with the functional expertise that the legal guys bring is absolutely crucial. Echoing Jon's point, it is very much about working together. Lloyd's has had a sophisticated procurement function for a long number of years now, and it's got the classic category team structure within there. But the legal subset within that category team does have its own nuances, and it has to operate differently in some respects because of the area of expertise that we're working in. So I think absolutely right that you have a procurement framework to work within. Absolutely has to be appropriate for the business and the services that we're acquiring.
So I think they're really unanimous support for the opening swings that the report comes out and talks about in terms of that procurement framework. It's fair to say there is a strong relationship in the Lloyd's panel. You got Jon and Sandy, both from the legal and the procurement team, and I know from personal experience, Andie and Nevada. So you've got a strong relationship also too between the legal function and the procurement function. And that's clearly a key ingredient. Andie, I'm going to start with you on that one. What's the secret ingredient there for an excellent working relationship between procurement and legal?
Trust. It's a cliche, but it is trust. You have to build your credibility, right? We are not necessarily the subject matter expert when it comes to legal. I'm not a lawyer, but it definitely builds, it builds upon trust. And you just mentioned a very important thing too. When you talk about relationship and working with the legal function, having a good relationship and trust with the lawyers are of course essential, but legal ops plays a big role in this. It's a triangle. If I look at it, you cannot have one missing and still have that functioning and be optimal.
And I expect, Sandy and Jon, that's going to be a key theme. And certainly I know the relationship you two have built over the years, no doubt trust and learning about each other has been a huge benefit for the success.
Absolutely, Jim. And I think, the point that Andie made about the legal practice management or legal operations is key as well, because they are, in many respects, part of the glue that makes it all hang together. I think I'd also call out another ingredient of success has been alignment. And that's, having that common focus and understanding, what our respective roles are and what that plays to when delivering the corporate objectives. So, it would be huge tensions if we were all trying to pull in opposite directions. So understanding our respective positions is absolutely crucial.
I'm going to touch on some of the key themes that the Market Intelligence Report talked about. One of the themes was clients becoming perhaps less loyal to suppliers. What is your thought on that?
I think, Jim, as ever, there's a balance to strike on this one. There is still no substitute for a history of having worked together to have that sort of shared corporate memory. And you spoke about the experiences through COVID. Certainly what we have found is that when we have had to spring to action on, for example, the government schemes here in the UK, we've had to select our lawyers very quickly. And it's really helpful when there's a shared understanding of what your general objectives often are, when there's already an appreciation of, for example, in our case, the suite of products that we've got, the systems that we have, the culture that we have. And then actually what it means is that your legal advisors are not advising on what might be the more standard parts of the instruction. they're actually adding value on the more bespoke elements. That all said, I think you do need to create some competitive tension. And much as we try and create long-standing partnerships with our firms, we're really keen to ensure that we don't remain fixed to a pool of law firms or be reduced from that pool. I think what's important is always to be really aware of challenger firms who are outside of that, who are the firms who are nudging, who others are speaking about, and to make sure that your process has and your mindset is such that you're willing to consider others. Whilst there's that loyalty, also cost will be a factor. And so you're going to look for your trusted advisors to move with you in that regard. And if they don't, then you need to look at alternatives.
And we'll certainly explore the competition bit a little bit more, because the report talks about some of those competitive forces and what the market is seeing. So we'll certainly dive into more detail there. I think along the same lines, one of the themes was business relationships are replacing what was otherwise a personal or a trusted advisor relationship. And so consistent with that theme, and the way certainly at Pursuit, what we talk about is moving from a personal relationship to more of a data-driven plus personal relationship, so it can't just be personal. Sandy, what are your thoughts on that? Are we moving away from pure personal, the old golf course or the long dinner relationships, to now pure business, or is it a balance between the two? What do you think is happening in the market there?
I think we're long gone from the long lunches. At the end of the day, business is about sort of people, and we have to trust our partners, whether it be inside the organisation or outside. So the ability to draw upon the value that comes from very strong business relationships shouldn't be underestimated. There's still definite value to be driven from that. I think, as in all of these instances, there's a time and a place, and we do leverage relationships when we need to get the best possible end result for our customers and our business, and we will play to the strengths that those relationships bring. But as legal becomes, in some instances more commoditized, more automated, maybe even in some cases, then inevitably we're going to see an erosion of the softer people aspects of it. We're not there yet. I think if I had a couple of things on my list where I'd like lawyers to be more open, it would be to allow more interaction with a wider selection from the legal market. And whilst we have the dynamics of around the panel and thinking about how do we create our own market and our competitive tensions within that market, in some instances we could be even more active in helping bring on new entrants. But as a business, we are very conservative. We don't take our exposure to risk as being a light thing at all, and therefore we're hesitant in going too far.
I might come back to the strategy around perhaps creating a bit more competitive tension or opening up the market a bit. Andie, any thoughts yourself in relation to that balance between those personal relationships and the business relationship?
Yeah, I think, relationships are important. Institutional knowledge is important, but I will caveat that not all the time. You define a balance. You also have to watch out for complacency, as they mentioned before. It definitely depends on the nature of the matter as well, right? There are some matters that the institutional knowledge would be of higher priority than everything else. Whereas for others, routine work is like, what do you care? we can get the firm caught up pretty easily. And some firms are eager for business. They will be willing to, make the catch up for free or reduce costs just to minimize the transition costs. And that helps. We have had situations where we need to switch counsel midway because the incumbent was just not performing up to par. And in those situations, we didn't necessarily switch to the counsel that we had the longest standing relationship either. We look out at the market who has that expertise, and then we talked to a couple of them and we found the one that fits.
A couple of other trends that came out of the report too: the high analytical capabilities for better selection and demand for law firm efficiency. So again, I think that's consistent with the kind of the procurement effort. That's the kind of result you'd expect out of having a proper procurement framework. Another one that I think was quite interesting is that general commoditisation of legal services, again, which we've touched on, and the recognition that the likelihood is that there are many firms out there, perhaps amongst your panel, that can handle the scope of work required. Any thoughts on that? Are we seeing a bit more a move towards commoditisation? How fast do we think that is? And what do we think COVID might be doing to that trend and the other trends we're talking about? Jon, any thoughts on that, on the commoditisation?
So absolutely. Look, I'm a big fan of commoditisation. Ultimately, there will be specific types of legal support that there will be go-to firms. But I'd like to think, Jim, that that's the case on fewer and fewer matters. What I'm actually looking for is not just for me as the buyer of legal services to be thinking about what can be commoditized. Legal advisors are coming and saying, look, we've looked at what you've done over a period of time, and actually we think there are certain sort of key elements to this that we can box it up. So it's not just something that we need to seek to do. And commoditization is also legal suppliers to think about how they can recycle what they've done before and then focus on the value add above that.
Andie, what about Novartis? Have you guys been looking at kind of categories of work that you think are falling into that commoditized bracket and seeing how better to source that kind of work?
We've been looking at that. It's not a one-time effort. It depends on the involvement of activities within our organization, but it also depends on how ready the market is. The legal service providers are definitely expanding their scope, and as more and more are being added to their offering, we revisit this. Okay, does that make sense for our organization? Does it not? And those are the things that we just need to keep on looking at it and revisiting, challenging ourselves as to where are the opportunities and become more efficient. There are definitely areas where you still would need legal counsel for. But as Jon said, even for those matters, there are some that still cling on to the old ways of working, and there are others that actually would be very proactive in telling you, like, look, these are the things that we could be doing differently. I don't need to do it myself. We could have a provider perform those tasks. And there are definitely law firms that are much more innovative and proactive, and they have another arm in that business, performing those functions too. So you look at those firms and providers and you just make a decision on, what makes sense in those situations.
The report spends quite a bit of time on just the whole concept of market competition. We've touched on that a little bit. There's a couple of conclusions that I'll read out and then we'll come back to talk about creating competition, if you like. The report talks about rivalry among existing competitors. It ranks it as high. Threat of new entrants is medium to high. Think Big Four, think alternative legal service providers. The threat of substitute services, high. Bargaining power of suppliers, low or low to medium. And then bargaining power of buyers, medium to high and increasing. Thinking about those findings, how important do we think competition is to ensuring that your organisation's getting the best value that it can?
Yeah, I think it is still really important that there's that competition there. It keeps them sharp and focused and hopefully avoids complacency setting in. We have a structure whereby it's very unusual for anything of any significance to be solely decided by one person either. So it's important that the firms work hard to convince all the stakeholders that their offerings are not only the most commercially acceptable, but bring the other added value, things that we're looking for. And we're keen to measure across a balanced scorecard of deliverables. So clearly, value for money is one of those aspects, but so is the bringing of innovation to the bank, the ability to help with our sort of cultural ambitions, whether that be D&I targets and so on. And all of that you can translate back to the competition element. It gets the firms working harder across the board in all those different areas. And I think we do a pretty good job when it comes to ensuring that competition within the panels. They're not so small as it's becoming a duopoly or a small consortium, but equally they're not so big that it makes it unruly and unmanageable. So I think we've struck a reasonable medium. I would just like to see a bit more sort of left field activity maybe thrown in there, just to be a bit more disruptive. It's vital for keeping everybody on their toes.
Having seen what competition can do to price, and recognising that you really don't know the market price in any particular point of time for a piece of work until you've actually tested the markets. Tell me, Andie, is that your experience too? Is that part of what underlies the Novartis approach?
Absolutely. We definitely are pushing for competition, like reasonable competition, right? I don't want the firms to think that we're comparing, a top-notch MLaw 100 with somebody else that isn't even in that list. Definitely trying to compare them peers to peers, and that would keep our expectations in a reasonable context too, because some of our folks might not have done an RP for a long time, and they might still be used to this old way of doing things, and they don't even know, for a matter that is not recurring as much as some of the others, they don't know exactly what the market would look like. And doing it, putting it out to the market helps in driving that expectations to the right level.
Any thoughts from your end on the importance of competition?
So I think having some hunger in your suppliers where there is a desire to impress continues to be really important. I've had conversations with firms where I've spoken to them about the fact that I feel they've become complacent, because actually we own a stake in them as well. We want our firms to be the best that they can be, and either they will respond to that or they won't. And I think it's incumbent upon us to have that conversation. Part of it, Jim, is also how you create that competition. So we spend a lot of time speaking to the firms with which we work to let them know what our strategic objectives are. As Sandy's mentioned as well, our culture, the things that we really care about. If you're going to give a firm that sits outside of that a fighting chance of actually competing with those firms, then you need to help them get up the curve. And that's a really, really important part as well. The last thing I'd say in terms of competition, I think you can have competition, but it's still encourage collaboration. One of the things that I think we've done successfully over our last panel period that I don't think we'd achieved before was actually having our firms work with us, not just in terms of looking at alternative ways of achieving reductions in legal spend, but where they help us with added value in terms of some of the things that we're trying to do as a broader legal community. And so we should facilitate that. If you can do both of those, you've cracked it.
Just very quickly on that point about cooperation within the legal community, I think we've seen much more of that, and the firms being much more open to recognising that they play themselves to different strategic parts. And if we've got a big project that covers some entry-level legal requirements all the way to top-end strategic advice, then the best result for us is to have a strong cooperative sort of partnership arrangement with more than one firm typically. And we've done that now on 2 or 3 occasions, and it's worked really well on some of the larger projects where you do get the low-cost source of supply merged with and working tightly with the high-end city law firms delivering the strategic advice, for instance. So competition, yes, but recognising where the real value is to be gained is crucial too.
The report spends quite a bit of time also talking about some legal spend management tools and strategies, and highlights 3 or 4 of those. RFPs have become the standard way to select law firms and legal service providers. 85% of survey respondents issued RFPs, and another 15% plan to do so. We're talking about RFPs at a matter level. Andie, the importance of RFPs as a legal spend management strategy and tool?
A lot of people, especially lawyers who might not have done that before, they might think that, RFPs takes time. I don't have the time for it. I need to engage the counsel yesterday. Let's get it out now, like something like that. The truth is, if they start the process like this, they probably will end up doing a lot of back and forth with the law firm. There will be, a lot of negotiations on the back end, talking about, what the fees would be, we didn't talk about this before. I didn't think about it. Now we need to catch up. All those things that happen after. The RP would bring those forward. So we might have to spend a little bit more time upfront but there's a more thorough process. Think it through as to, what kind of fee structure is actually the most appropriate one for this type of matter. What's the scope? What exactly is our strategy? What are our objectives for this? Are we trying to get out? Are we trying to settle? Or we want to bring it all the way to trial? Sure. We need to spend a little more time up front, but it helps us, after the RP is done, that everything else would already be laid out in the way that it should be, so that there's not a lot of catch up in the back end.
Presumably, if you haven't invested that time and energy at the beginning, it's difficult to see how you're actually going to get the best value for money proposal from the best equipped law firm. Anything you want to add there?
Echo Andie's thoughts, definitely about bringing everything up front. That's time well invested and it pays dividends down the line. But the other aspect I think that I would point to is that it's always good to have a structure around these things, especially if you're trying then to compare and also share that information in a structured way across, what could be quite a large stakeholder group ultimately. In our case, so having the RFP to call upon just gives us some really well structured information that is comparable.
I agree with the prudence of having an RFP. I think we've made it standard now that there'll be certain values or types of legal work where we're able to go out to one firm and do it in a more informal way. But as soon as we're looking at a particular level of legal spend on a particular matter, then an RFP is absolutely the way to go. I mean, one of the important things to think about is who your stakeholders are. And certainly, within Lloyd's, there's a keen focus, obviously not just on the quality, but on the cost. There's going to be an extreme focus on cost. And I think if there's informality about the way that you conduct your processes, you're not going to do a great job of managing your stakeholders' expectations. You take a step back before you start a matter. You think about alternative fee arrangements. Are they going to be possible? Think about whether or not there are alternative resourcing opportunities, and also think about some of the best practice that you've experienced. Having taken that step back before you actually go out to your market, I think can be incredibly beneficial in terms of what you end up with as a product.
Well, you've each already talked about some of the other strategies. In fact, the report talks about a big jump in popularity last year in pre-matter scoping. Of course, that is key in an RFP context, which now is around about, I think, 63%. It went up from 46% back in 2018, with another 26% planning in the future. So no doubt, pre-matter scoping tying, as I said, very closely in with the RFP process. If you haven't invested the time and received the feedback also from law firms, I know a lot of pre-matter scoping can involve your suppliers or a selection of your law firms to be able to get feedback on that scoping and understand the parameters of the work that you're sending out there.
And I think, Jim, just reflecting on post-COVID world in this respect, we are becoming, I think, more and more comfortable as businesses in working collaboratively, remotely. We've been forced into that. And whilst, it might seem more effort to put all of that stuff in up front, the tools that we're now using are actually making us more efficient in doing that. It's not that long ago that I would have been expected to probably jump on a train, get down to London, have a workshop for half a day, just to do the initial entry into a project and get the background and the understanding. And we're doing all of that now remotely. So I think there's some interesting dynamics coming out about how we work internally and externally with our partners.
Just that change of behaviour, John, not having to go down, spend a day and do that kind of workshop and actually have a much more efficient process than that. I think we're going to see more and more of that essentially across every aspect, not only of the engagement, but of the way in which the matters are going to be handled.
So we have tended now, rather than coming to our law firms and saying, this is what we want to do, I found it to be really successful, particularly around innovation, when you bring the law firms in before you've actually given out the mandate, before you've actually started the procurement process, and say, look, we're just shaping this now, and actually we want to bring your knowledge and expertise. You'll do it on a speculative basis. Actually, we'll have an opportunity to see the value that you may add as the project proceeds. And one thing I'd also call out is that's not just in terms of the law professionals that the legal firms and alternative legal service providers will bring. Very often when we're scoping these projects, we're talking to our potential tech providers, and we're talking to the people who are going to work behind the scenes in terms of the systems. And very often I think there can be real value add now from law firms and alternative legal service providers when they bring their head of technology, their head of automation, and that's when they can really add value in terms of that pre-matter scoping, and when they're actually helping you sort of define what your project and your objectives are actually going to be. It
kind of brings me to one of the other strategies. One of the top strategies talked about in the report is the negotiating alternative fee arrangements, essentially. Anything other than pure hourly rate based approach that's clearly increased dramatically in importance over the last few years. I think we're up at now 83% compared to 65% a couple of years ago. Perhaps, Andie, with you, is that something which is becoming more and more important at Novartis, moving away from the hourly rate and developing strategies to determine alternative fee arrangements?
This is definitely one of the key goals that our legal management wants to go towards. It is a process, I would say. We can't just jump to 100% AFAs tomorrow. It is, I think education is important. And by that, I mean both for our law firms and our in-house counsel, because there are definitely some that are more familiar and used to it than the others. Even with law firms, some are still a little resistant when we ask for AFAs, and that's just an education process, and say, hey, we're trying to move away from the hourly model. Let's explore AFAs a little more to align our goals and objectives.
Andie and Jon, I think Lloyd's is probably still reasonably early in its journey, is it, on moving to AFAs as a strategy for managing legal spend?
No, not particularly. We now have the majority of our spend going onto AFAs. It's actually by exception is the hourly rate model. There are instances where hourly rate is still the best solution for us. I liked Andie's comment about education being important, and that's been a key plank of our development. So we haven't just tried to impose the thinking either internally or externally. We've had discussions in forums with our law firms about what they look like and how successful they can be from both sides. And we've run workshops internally educating our in-house legal teams as to when AFAs are appropriate and what the different alternative fee arrangements could potentially look like. So the majority of our spend is on either capped fees, fixed fees, some kind of blended rates, all sorts of alternatives, to be honest.
And interestingly, you find yourself or Lloyd's doing more of the educating of the law firms rather than the other way around.
I'm not sure we'd just say it's more of, I think it's been fairly proactive.
So we've worked with experts within law firms to come and help us educate ourselves. So it's been done very much in partnership. I agree with Sandy that I think we are part of the way along the journey, actually, and it's all very well, I think, delivering a panel with lots of great processes and even going through that education process, but it's ensuring that there's a change of mindset and culture amongst the lawyers, so that they understand that their role is not simply as an in-house advisor, but actually supplier and cost management and cost discipline is really important. And so part of that is about actually understanding alternative fee arrangements and then being able to deploy them.
One of the findings the report comes up with is that panels appear to be losing their top spot in popularity, as only 68% of the respondents to the survey stated they currently use them, with another 26% said they'll use them in the future. Instead of panel selections, clients are turning to matter level hiring via RFPs. Panels are losing their flavour a little bit, or is it a question of emphasis? Really, once you've got a panel established, then it's matter level RFPs within that panel. What do we think? Do we think they're losing their flavour?
I'd say that the way that Lloyd's has to operate, because of all the regulatory requirements, all the compliance that we want to put around our third-party relationships, there's real value in putting suppliers through a pre-qualification process of some description, which then allows them to be agile in bidding for work. So if we didn't have a panel arrangement that allowed us to do that pre-qualification process, we'd have to have something else in place, and that'd be quite a move. I quite like the idea of a dynamic panel where it's one in, one off on a much more regular basis or whatever. But practically, how we would get there, I think that's still some way off for us.
So there you have it, everyone. Some great insights there from Sandy Duncan and Jon Alexander, both from Lloyd's, as well as Andie Lam from Novartis. Great insights around why you should, for example, be adopting a formal procurement practice in relation to the buying of legal services. Some great insights in relation to AFAs, and why, at least when spend gets to a particular threshold, you should certainly be adopting an RFP process. So thanks very much for joining us, and thanks to the Buying Legal Council. Bye, everyone.